All right, where did we leave off yesterday in talking about these notes? Did we get through talking about what the Southern Gothic genre is? I believe we did. Awesome. Okay, so let's look at the family tree a little bit. And if you will also take out this sheet. In a minute. Take this out as well. If you don't have one, it's over on the windowsill. All right? So we're looking at the family tree, and there are some things that we need to chart on this from the family tree. Cool? Okay. So the first thing here is that Ann's, he is the father. So on my character chart sheet, I am writing down that Ann's is the father. Okay? The mother is Addie. So I'm writing down that she is the mother. Okay, so father, mother. So we see that there is ultimately like one patriarch, and that is Addie's father. She marries a man named Ann's, all right, and she has a dotted line relationship with a man named Reverend Whitfield, if you know what a dotted line relationship means. Ba-dum-ching. All right. Anyway, she has 5 children. All right. And it will help you guys if you jot down if they're a boy or a girl, because we have a lot of misunderstanding about that when we read normally. Okay, so Cash, Darrell, Vardaman, and Jewel are all boys. They're all male. And Dewey Dell is a female. Dewey Dell. Okay. You are going to need to kind of make sure that you remind yourself that you have this family tree in your binder, because at different moments when we're kind of going through the book, you're going to be confused, and you need to have that there to kind of check yourself. Cool? All right. So here's some things to look for when we're reading this together. All right. Characters often express conflicting opinions and contradicting sides to the same story. Look for changes in typeface. When the text goes from normal to italic, it indicates a shift in perspective or a character's inner thoughts. Okay? If you get lost, check to see whose name is at the beginning of the chapter. That's why keeping this character chart is going to be so important for you. Okay? Go back to the last place you remember where the story made sense and reread, and then ask yourself, where is Addie? Okay? So Oprah actually had this book as part of her book club one year. All right? And so she gives some additional suggestions as well. Some key points in reading Faulkner. Be patient. It is okay to reread, and it might be necessary to reread. Understand the characters. They are extremely important. Explore the timelessness of the story and the idea that the themes that we're seeing in this are themes that we can see, throughout other literature that's written in other times. All right, and then think about your role. Faulkner is not straightforward. There's no omniscient narrator. It requires you to be engaged because you have to figure the story out as you read it. Word? Okay, so take out your questions, the 1 through 14 questions, and take out your book and the character chart. All right, I'm going to start working through this with you guys, starting with chapter 1, which is the Darrell chapter. And we're going to go through it together for a while until you kind of get the hang of what's going on. Cool? Okay, so chapter 1 is a Darrell chapter. And we know that Darrell is one of the older of the sons. That's all we know about him going into this. All right. Jewel and I come up from the field, following the path in single file. Although I am 15 feet ahead of him, Anyone watching us from the cotton house can see Jewel's frayed and broken straw hat a full head above my own. Okay, so he's telling us something. He's giving us a bit of characterization about Jewel. Tell us, what is he doing? He's taller. Okay, so he is saying Jewel is taller. And while this doesn't seem like much, it is a big deal. All right? And that's the kind of things that Faulkner does. The path runs straight as a plumb line. Like when you're plumbing something, you want it to be straight because any kind of time the pipe turns or curves, it could get clogged. All right? So straight as a plumb line. Worn smooth by feet and baked brick hard by July. Between the green rows of laid-by cotton to the cotton house in the center of the field, where it turns and circles the cotton house at 4 soft right angles and goes on across the field again, worn so by feet and fading precision. So he is describing the path in a lot of detail, the path through the field. Okay. The cotton house is of rough logs, from between which the chinking has long fallen. The chinking is kind of like the mortar or the mud that you'd put between logs to kind of seal off the holes where they didn't lay flat together. Okay. Square with a broken roof, set at a single pitch, it leans in empty and shimmering dilapidation in the sunlight. A single broad window and 2 opposite walls, giving onto the approaches of the path. When we reach it, I turn and follow the path which circles the house. Jewel, 15 feet behind me, looking straight ahead, steps in a single stride through the window. Still staring straight ahead, his pale eyes like wood set in his wooden face. Okay, look, his pale eyes. Eyes are a very important reoccurring symbol. And another name for a reoccurring symbol is a motif. Okay, but he is also describing Jewel as having pale eyes. So on my characterization sheet, I'm going to go back and jot that down. Okay? He crosses the floor in 4 strides with the rigid gravity of a cigar store Indian dressed in patched overalls and endued with life from the hips down, and steps in a single stride through the opposite window and into the path again just as I come around the corner. In single file and 5 feet apart, and Jewel now in front, we go on up the path toward the foot of the bluff. Toll's wagon, we don't know who Toll is yet, stands beside the spring hitched to the rail, the reins wrapped about the steep stanchion. In the wagon bed are 2 chairs. Jewel stops at the spring and takes the gourd from the willow branch and drinks. Do y'all know what he's doing? What that means? Do y'all know what a gourd is? And like they would hollow them out and they would use it like as a cup to drink. Okay? I pass him and mount the path, beginning to hear Cash's saw. When I reach the top, he has quit sawing. Standing in a litter of chips, he is fitting 2 of the boards together. Between the shadow spaces, they are yellow as gold. Okay, so we've got some similes coming up. Like soft gold. And this indicates value. Bearing on their flanks in smooth undulations, the marks of the adze blade. And this is a tool that helps kind of shave or cut down wood. A good carpenter Cash is. So that gives us a little bit of information about him. He holds the 2 planks on the trestle, fitted along the edges in a quarter of the finished box. He kneels and squints along the edge of them. Then he lowers them and takes up the adze. A good carpenter. Addie Bundren could not want a better one. A better box to lie in. What's he building? Casket. Wow. It will give her confidence and comfort. I go on to the house, followed by the chuck, chuck, chuck of the adze. Okay, so why might this be written the way it is written? Huh? How so? How so for emphasis?
Like you can hear the spacing.
You can hear the beat. Yeah, you can hear the spacing of his work. You can hear the beat. All right? So even though this is a relatively short chapter, we've already learned quite a bit. Okay? So what characters are introduced? Okay, Darl, Jewel.
I'm gonna name my kid Darl.
What else? Cash. And kind of inadvertently, Addie. Okay, because we know that there's need for a coffin to be built. So what is Cash doing? Building a coffin. Okay, so those are our answers for the first two. Now we're going to go back to our character sheet right here. All right, so we see Darl opening the narration. We don't learn a lot about him because he is the one narrating this chapter. All right, we know that Jewel is what? Tall, and he has pale eyes. And instead of walking around the cotton house, he goes through it. So he is a little bit, what's a good word to describe that, maybe? Huh? He's a little bit like against, the formality of what you would normally do, kind of against tradition. All right, so Cash, what do we learn about him? He's a good carpenter. And what do we learn about Addie? She is potentially dying. She's in need of a coffin. Okay, so chapter 2 is Cora Tull. So I saved out the eggs and baked yesterday. The cakes turned out right well. We depend a lot on our chickens. They are good layers, what few we have left after the possums and such. Snakes, too, in the summer. A snake will break up a hen house quicker than anything. So after they were going to cost so much more than Mr. Tull thought, and after I promised that the difference in the number of eggs would make it up, I had to be more careful than ever because it was on my final say. So we took them. We could have stocked cheaper chickens, but I gave my promise, as Miss Lawington said when she advised me to get a good breed, because Mr. Tull himself admits that a good breed of cows or hogs pays in the long run. So when we lost so many of them, we couldn't afford to use the eggs ourselves, because I could not have had Mr. Tull chide me when it was on my say, so we took them. So when Miss Lawington told me about the cakes, I thought that I could bake them and earn enough at one time to increase the net value of the flock the equivalent of 2 head. And that by saving the eggs out at one time, even the eggs wouldn't be costing anything. And that week they laid so well that I not only saved out enough eggs above what we had engaged to sell to bake the cakes with, I had saved enough so that the flour and the sugar and the stove wood would not be costing anything. So I baked yesterday, more careful than I ever baked in my life, and the cakes turned out right well. But when we got to town this morning, Miss Lawington told me the lady had changed her mind and was not going to have the party after all. All right, so Mrs. Tull is kind of going over in her head a situation that she is in. All right, she convinced her husband to buy a more expensive breed of chicken because she felt like it would make more money in the long run. All right, because it's like, if you buy a better breed of animal, it's going to do better for you in the long run. Well, they lost a lot of chickens to other things like snakes. All right, so she knew that they were going to have to sell all of the eggs. They weren't going to be able to eat any of them in order to make up for the difference. All right, because this is how poor they are. Okay, so she gets commissioned to make some cakes for some ladies who live in town. And so she makes these cakes, and then she gets there and she finds out that they don't want them after all. So this was an opportunity that she could have made more money, but now they've changed their minds after she did all of that work. She ought to have taken those cakes anyway, Kate says. Well, I say, I reckon she never had no use for them now. She ought to taken them, Kate says. But those rich town ladies can change their minds. Poor folks can't. Okay, this is something I want you to write a mark by. This is what I call a spot passage. Like if I were to put this on a test, I would just put this passage on a test, all right? And then I would say, who is saying this and what is it pertaining to? And you would say that Kate is saying this to Cora, and they are talking about the cakes, but in addition to that, it is giving us more information about the characters as a whole and one of the themes, which is kind of the conflict between the country folk and the city folk. Okay? All right. Riches is nothing in the face of the Lord, for he can see into the heart. Okay, so Cora is thinking this. How does that characterize her? She's religious. Maybe I can sell them at the bazaar Saturday, I said. They turned out real well. You can't get $2 a piece for them, Kate says. Well, it isn't like they cost me anything, I say. I saved them out and swapped a dozen of them for the sugar and flour. It isn't like the cakes cost me anything. As Mr. Toll himself realizes that the eggs I saved were over and beyond what we have engaged to sell, so it was like we had found the eggs or they had been given to us. So what is she doing here? She's rationalizing it. Good. She ought to have taken those cakes when she same as gave you her word, Kate says. The Lord can see into the heart. If it is his will that some folks has different ideas of honesty from other folks, it is not my place to question his decree. I reckon she never had any use for them, I say. They turned out real well, too. The quilt is drawn up to her chin, hot as it is, with only her 2 hands and her face outside. She is propped on the pillow with her head raised so she can see out the window, and we can hear him every time he takes up the adze or the saw. If we were deaf, we could almost watch her face and hear him, see him. Her face is wasted away so that the bones draw just under the skin in white lines. Her eyes are like 2 candles when you watch them gutter down into the sockets of iron candlesticks. But not the eternal, but the eternal and the everlasting salvation and grace is not upon her. So remember when I told you about eyes earlier? Here is another thing about eyes. Who is she talking about, do you think? Addie. All right. So she said her face is wasted away. Her eyes are like 2 candles when you watch them gutter down into the sockets of candlesticks. So you can barely see the flame, but it's about to go out. And so she's comparing her eyes, the life in her eyes, to the flame of that candle. All right, and this is important. But the eternal and the everlasting salvation and grace is not upon her. What does Cord Toll mean by that? Yeah, she's not saved. She doesn't believe that, she is saved. They turned out real nice, I say, but not like the cakes Addie used to bake. You can see that girl's washing and ironing in the pillow slip, if ironed it ever was. Maybe it will reveal her blindness to her. Laying there at the mercy and the menstruation of 4 men and a tomboy girl. There's not a woman in this section could ever bake with Addie Bundren, I say. First thing we know, she'll be up and baking again, and then we won't have any sale for hours at all. Under the quilt, she makes no more of a hump than a rail would, and the only way you can tell she is breathing is by the sound of the mattress shucks. What is a mattress shuck? Okay, so back in the day, they would create bags with pieces of material that they had, maybe a sack that flour came in, and they would fill it with the shucks off of corn, and that would be their mattress. All right? What?
So that's all.
Yeah, and we're talking less than 100 years ago from where we are now. Okay? So, not too far removed from us. Even the hair at her cheek does not move. Even with that girl standing right over her, fanning her with the fan. While we watch, she swaps the fan to the other hand without stopping it. Is she sleeping? Kate whispers. She's just watching Cash yonder, the girl says. Okay, hold up. What's Cash doing? We learned in the last chapter. Building a coffin. Okay, she's just watching Cash yonder.
She watching the Cash?
For her. So, yeah, it's awful. Okay. We can hear the saw in the board. It sounds like snoring. Okay, remember how we heard the adze with the chuck and the beat? Okay, so again we have kind of sounds of the tools. sounds like snoring. Okay, think about euphemisms for death.
What is a euphemism?
It's a polite way of saying something offensive, like sleep. Eula turns on the trunk and looks out the window. Her necklace looks real nice with her red hat. You wouldn't think it only cost 25 cents. You ought to have taken those cakes. She ought to have taken those cakes, Kate says.
Teachers and students, may I have your attention, please? At the time when the bell rings, will those invited guests make their way to the arena for the National Signing Day? Those invited guests, please make your way to the arena when the bell rings.
All right. I could have used the money real well, but it's not like they cost me anything except the baking. I can tell him that anybody is likely to make a miscue, but it's not all of them that can get out of it without loss. I can tell him. It's not everybody can eat their mistakes, I can tell him. So she's looking, for what she needs to tell her husband. Someone comes through the hall. It is Darrell. He does not look in as he passes the door. Eula watches him as he goes on and passes from sight again toward the back. Her hand rises and touches her beads lightly, and then her hair. When she finds me watching her, her eyes go blank. So what does this tell us about Eula? She likes Darrell. All right. So on our questions for chapter 2, who is Cora? Did y'all pick up who is she?
Oh, I didn't know. Mr. Toll's wife.
Yeah, Toll's wife, and she is a neighbor. You know how people go visit other people when they're sick? And who is there with her? Kate and Eula. And they are probably her daughters. All right. So on our character sheet for Cora, we can say what?
She's religious.
Religious? What else?
She is neighbor to the Bible.
Neighbor. She's worried about what concerning Addie?
She isn't saved.
Huh?
She isn't saved.
Worried about her salvation. Yeah. And we'll pick up there tomorrow. So, just don't worry about reading too much ahead.